Hello, and welcome to Coder Radio. It's Mike as always, and yeah, just a little bit of news items. Fable's back, so that was a lot of much ado about nothing. If you're on an Anthropic, I think it's Pro or Max plan, you have a half your, token allotment, right? A lot of people are going back and forth of whether it's been nerfed or not. I don't know. That's really, not something I want to wade into right now. But it's interesting. Seems like there was a lot of drama. It also seems like competition worked. ChatGPT releasing 5.6 Sol. Sol is in the sun, SOL. Really did seem to put the pressure on them. So, yay, competition means you get more stuff. I know people have lots of gripes, but that's better than nothing. Speaking of AI coding, I want to announce we have a new sponsor, Warp. Warp from warp.dev. Ben and Zach have been on there from there. We're doing a community collab Apache 2 project on GitHub, link in the show notes, called Coder Conduit. It's a joint community project and a live sandbox, collaboration between Coder Radio and Warp. The goal of which is to demonstrate how software factories can help to drive community-driven open source projects. So we're going to be talking a lot about software factories in the next 3-ish episodes. The whole idea, just giving you a rundown, and do check out the GitHub repo because you guys can contribute. There's a slight contribution notice, code of conduct, basic stuff, right? Be nice. The triage tech, these are all the agents we're going to have. Is a diagnostic agent. So when a new issue is created, the agent reads the description and categorizes it. Is it a bug enhancement, a new request? If the context is missing, it'll actually go back and ask the submitter. So these are all issues on GitHub itself for details. The coder, pretty simple implementation agent, looks at issues the triage agents have been tagged ready to implement via a GitHub label. Then it generates code and submits a PR. Pretty cool, right? Staff engineer, planning agent. Exactly what it sounds like on the tin. We tried to make this really simple. It's for tackling larger feature requests using a spec-driven development approach. So it generates a comprehensive plan that the coder agent can implement. The code critic, basically PR reviews. I don't think I need to explain that too much. The architect, running on a scheduled cron. This proactive agent scans the repository for technical debt. So this would be things like, we're going to have multiple people submitting pull requests. Is there redundancies? Could something be extracted out? Are we using magic strings everywhere? Something like that, right? So go ahead and contribute. Again, this is sponsored by Warp. You can also check out Warp. They have a lot of new things they've implemented, actually. I got to get back with them in the Warp app. That's my terminal of choice. And check it out. And they have all the latest models. They're very excited about that. They have Fable. They really have everything. In fact, you can basically run more than just the core, let's say, Anthropic and ChatGPT models. You can run, OpenAI models. You can run, the list is too long for me to go into, but I've been playing around with a little bit of the alternatives just to diversify my own implementations, as we all explore this a little more. And it's an interesting little catch that I don't think people get too much. So yeah, check it out. This is all the kind of thing that they're talking about with their software factory. They've got some good blog posts about it, and that GitHub link is in the show notes. All right, one more thing. So we are rocking and rolling our way out of the summer, which this boring middle-aged dad says, oh, thank God. It's been just a terrible summer. Really hot, sticky, humid. But I'm wondering, and I do have a request, you students out there in Coderland here, what are you looking for back to school? I know down south here in Florida, school is literally by the time this comes out, a week, maybe a week and a half, depending on how quickly editing goes. So what is, are we going for college? Are we doing side projects? Are we taking computer science class? I'd be interested to hear from you. Just based on the feedback on the show with Professor Seeley, you guys seemed really interested, and there's quite a lot of you who are either considering or are taking, some sort of software-related education, right? Whether it's formal computer science, or I know a couple of you wrote in, you're taking like a software development course at a technical school. So I'd love to hear more about that. I think it's something that would probably be worth at least an episode or two. and we can go right into it. All right. Also, I still have availability for the end of the summer. So if you want anything done or you need like a fractional annoying guy to tell you why you don't need to port everything to Rust, I'm here for that. More importantly, to tell your boss, probably. Right. And yeah, so with a quick word from our other sponsor, Alderaan Games, we're going to get into our awesome interview today with Mike. Mike from Homebrew. That's right. Homebrew, as in brew, install all your stuff, which I was shocked to learn is running on WSL. That means Windows, right? So Windows subsystem for Linux uh, and Linux. But also, I think most of you who would be running it on Mac. But there's actually a lot more stuff going on with Brew than I really knew. In particular, it's just a lot more powerful. And this new V6 that came out a few months ago, they've really jacked up the just the capabilities. So I think you're going to enjoy the conversation with Mike right after this ad. We're brought to you today by Alderaan Games, the makers of the hit dinosaur massively multiplayer game that's available on just about every platform, Path of Titans. Check it out if you like dinosaurs, if you like playing online, that is a hit. They also make a number of other great games. But what they really want to talk about today is their hiring. They are an Unreal shop, so Unreal experience is preferred, especially preferred if you have anti-cheat experience. However, they have multiple positions open, and they are willing to entertain junior developers who are keen to learn and ready to rock. Go ahead and reach out to them at Alderaan Games. They're also in the Discord if you post yourself in the Looking for Work channel. Enjoy. Good luck. All right. I've got Mike McQuaid of the Homebrew Project. Mike, I think we all know what your work is. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm great. Thank you. How are you?
I'm good. So I have to say, you've been awfully busy.
Yeah, I try.
So what's new in Brewland? Let's just dive right in.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess maybe the motivation for us having this wee chat was Homebrew 6.00, which dropped. I'm trying to remember exactly when it is. It was not super far ago, not super recently. 11th of June. Yeah, so about a month and a bit ago. So that was like our new major release of Homebrew. It had a bunch of different stuff in there, but mainly focused around kind of security and performance. Security because that's the world we live in, and performance because that's what everyone whines at me about, and I need to make them shut up.
That is my development philosophy as well. How can I get my email box to not be like this? It's so it's funny because I've run Homebrew for years. I've never particularly had a complaint about performance. Maybe I'm just more patient.
Yeah, I imagine so. Like it's funny. Like most people say the same thing of almost like, yeah, Homebrew's never felt slow. It's never been a problem or whatever. But yeah, there's like a vocal minority. Unfortunately, some of whom are my real life friends as well, who just like complain.
Yeah,
I think some of it is probably usage patterns for some of these things as well. Where if you update your stuff every day, if you're like one of those people, then it never felt very slow. If you update your stuff every few months or once a year or whatever, then, all of a sudden it's got like hundreds of packages to download and previously, I guess that one of the big changes was previously that was all the kind of downloading and installing was all quite serial, and we've parallelized a lot of that. So that obviously if you're installing one package in parallel or in serial, it's going to be the same speed. But if you're installing 100, then it's going to be dramatically different performance-wise if you're doing it in parallel on a nice machine with lots of threads like many people running Macs have.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Well, we should note Homebrew is also now running on Linux, and I was surprised to learn literally today WSL as well, huh?
Yeah, exactly. Well, so another fun thing relatively recently is not just it's on WSL, but we actually have one feature that is like Windows specific and not even WSL specific, in that if you've ever used brew files, if not, we should talk more about them. But if you've used brew files, they now support winget, which is one of those classic scratch or itch things where I use brew files everywhere for everything. And I was like, hey, I want to automatically install a bunch of stuff on my Windows machine using WSL. Can I do this inside of WSL? And then it was like, oh, I can. And then if I can do it inside of WSL, I can do it inside Homebrew. So you can now install your Windows software on your Windows machine using Homebrew, which is even more bizarre, perhaps.
No, it makes a ton of sense. I should probably just point out that winget is, and this is a gross simplification for folks who aren't running Windows or are still doing things kind of the old-fashioned way. It is effectively like apt-get for Windows. I know that's wild oversimplification.
Yeah, no, I think that's about right, because it is actually like nowadays embedded into the OS, and there's
Right.
like an OS wide kind of. I mean, even Mac OS. I guess not many people know this, but this is like if you install any .pkg files, like Apple keeps track of all those, and there's like package util or whatever. And it's sort of, you look at it funny. It's kind of a very basic package manager, and WinGet's like a bit more advanced. But yeah, it is nowadays the built-in package manager in Windows. The big difference being that most people on Windows most of the time are still getting most of their software not through winget, but instead through, just downloading it off websites.
Yeah, like MSIs or whatever through the GUI.
Yeah, although I'm very ignorant, but I think winget might be the back of kind of some of the Microsoft Store stuff as well.
I think it is. I think what it was is they didn't expose it, and to make it scriptable, like what you seem to be doing with Homebrew, it has to be a command line interface, right? It can't be double click UAC command 50 MSI files to get everything running. That would be, or God forbid, exe files. But that's enough about Windows, because it's a foreign land. So tell me about these brew files.
Yeah, so a brew file is basically like a declarative way of interacting with Homebrew, right? So rather than doing brew install X, brew install Y, brew upgrade, whatever, you can have a single file which has a bunch of definitions in it. So they were originally sort of created for, they were originally created by a sort of just like a very limited kind of gem files, but for brew sort of idea. And they've been, I guess I've extended them and worked very heavily on them over the years with the idea of, if you're a software developer and you're working on a software project, then you probably have a package.json for your npm stuff, or a Python requirements.txt, or a gem file in your Ruby projects. But most of those projects would always have somewhere in the README, oh, and by the way, you should install MySQL or Redis or Postgres or whatever it is. In some cases, they just leave that as an exercise to the reader from somewhere. In other cases, they say, oh, run these brew install commands. But the problem with that is it's all very manual and boring, and you can't really test it. And it's basic. For me, whenever you can turn documentation into code, you generally have a happy place, because code is easier to test than documentation. So the idea with a brew file is, like, in a project like that, you might have, your package.json, and then if you need MySQL and Redis, then you have a brew file in the repo which has a line that was like brew, and then it will say like brew, open quotes, close quotes, MySQL or Redis or whatever. And then you can run the brew bundle command, which is inspired by bundler in the Ruby ecosystem, because Homebrew is written in Ruby. So we have a bit of overlap there. And then that will, again, this is where it's declarative, is that you can run brew bundle, and its responsibility to get you from the state you're in right now into the state in the brew file. So that might be, I need to install this package. It might be, I need to upgrade this package. It might be, I need to unlink this package. It might be, I need to start a background service. So that's another thing that we can do for you. So again, with MySQL, it's not just saying install it, but it's like install and actually get up and running. And there's, a wide variety of other things and ecosystems and tasks you can solve in brew files nowadays that I won't go too deep on. But then the other perhaps interesting use case for brew file, which is what I also love using them for. Okay, so you can have your project specific stuff, but you can also use them on like a kind of system wide level. So there's a command called brew bundle dump, which basically says, okay, write out a brew file based on everything that is on my machine, right? And that is quite nice if you are someone who has like a .files repo. I imagine you're going to link stuff in the show notes. So if anyone wants to, you can link my .files repo, because it's public, in the show notes. And I have a brew file in there, which is basically all of the software on my machine at a given time. So what that means is, if I get a new Mac, then I can just run, amongst a couple of other commands, once I have Homebrew on the Mac, I can run brew bundle, and then that will install all of the software and get it all installed in the way that I like it. And then the last thing, which is kind of probably a very niche feature for clean freaks and or Homebrew maintainers like me, is there's a command called brew bundle cleanup, where you can say anything that is not in my brew file that is installed, I want you to uninstall all of that, right? So that's a nice way of almost like getting back to a clean state. So if you have your brew file in your Git repository for your .files or whatever, then you have a nice way of like version tracking, what's on my machine, what do I want to have, what do I not want to have, what do I want to install or uninstall or have running or not running or whatever, right? And it's basically, if you are used to doing stuff like, I guess, Terraform, or previously we were doing all like, Puppet and Chef and all
although
that fun stuff.
That's the old days, but yeah.
Yeah. So again, that's part of the thinking with this, is that like some of this was built for inside of GitHub where I worked at the time, where there had been various experiments over the years of like using Puppet to run developer machines. And like that model never really worked very well. And it was both very heavyweight and very confusing. So this is almost like a much lighter weight version of being like, okay, I want to declare what should be on my machine or what shouldn't be on my machine, and you can go and sort it out.
Is there any kind of cross? So let's say I have a brew bundle file, right? For my main, let's say my main MacBook. And for whatever reason, I have to get up and running on, let's say, an Ubuntu machine. Can that file work over on Ubuntu with Homebrew too? Or do I have to, is it OS bound?
Assuming that you want everything working the same on the Ubuntu machine, again,
right, let's just assume Yeah,
so that's kind of the beauty of this, right? Is in both modes I described. So both the mode where, so say if you have a project, right, that you are like, okay, everyone needs to have Redis and MySQL, then you can have that same brew file to define your packages on macOS and Linux, right? And it might be that you say, well, if I'm on Linux, I might want to use the Linux package manager or whatever. But the nice thing about this is it's like, okay, well, if you do decide to use brew files for this, you can have everyone on Mac and Linux running the same versions of the same things. You can also run and test this in CI as well, so you don't have the thing where a new person joins your team and it's like, oh, the instructions have been broken for 3 months, right? Instead, you can have a scheduled job.
I've definitely had that more than once, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. So instead, you want to automate all that. And it's, if you've got GitHub Actions access, again, you can trivially do that on Windows, Mac, and Linux. But then also the kind of Homebrew ecosystem nowadays, like the vast majority of packages are installed on Windows, Mac, and Linux. It used to be just Formula, which is our kind of open source, we build them from source and we give you a binary package. But now Casks, which are our kind of like the upstream, provides the binary. So say like Google Chrome, we don't build that from source ourselves. It's very complicated. Google provides us a nice binary. So that's installed with a Cask instead of with a Formula. So now we have Linux support for Casks. So a growing number of Casks now also supports things on Linux. So it's sort of a luck of the draw. But if you have planned things carefully, then it may be you have a brew file and all the software you have in that work perfectly on, I guess if you include WSL, Windows, Mac, and Linux, and you can have the same definition shared across all of them, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah, that seems pretty good for kind of onboarding folks to an organization, which is a problem I'm ashamed to say I've had many just about every time, because keeping that documentation up to date is just not my strong suit. Just, can't get that done. So what is the future without, giving too many spoilers if you've got tricks up your sleeve? Obviously, now you're hitting all three major platforms, because I do consider WSL to be slightly different than, vanilla Linux, right? I mean, I know 3 people at Microsoft just had a little bit of a heart attack, but it is a little different, right?
It is.
So you're supporting a lot here, right? You've got Mac OS, and you go a few versions back. You've got Linux, which is just a lot to support in general. And now you've got WSL. Oh, is it specifically WSL2 only, or are you going all the way back to the older one?
Yeah, I think it's WSL2 only nowadays. Okay. I think we used to support WSL1, but I think on modern Windows it's very hard or impossible.
I don't even think people are really using WSL1 anymore. I just get the impression.
Although as a brief tangent, as a nerd, I thought WSL1 was cooler. I'm just putting it out there, right? Like the WSL2 model of like, it's essentially running just like a virtual machine with Linux in it on your machine. It's like that, okay, that's cool and it works better for everyone and whatever. But the original like WSL1 model, I don't know if you know how they were doing it, but it was essentially like, if you're familiar with Wine, which stands for Wine is not an emulator, which was the kind of the tool for Linux, and I guess it works on Mac OS as well, where it just basically was a way of running Windows applications where it would translate the syscalls. The syscalls and the standard library and whatever to the local system that you're on, right? And WSL1 was like that, but for Windows, where they just translated Linux syscalls to run on Windows natively. And I always just thought that was cooler. Like, and obviously, like in the end, that approach was abandoned by Microsoft, and I'm sure it had a lot of problems. So I'm sure it'd be an absolute nightmare to build and maintain. But I don't care. I think it's cooler.
Yeah, no, I feel the same way because Windows is, I'm sure you've gotten the impression, not my home environment in any serious way. But when I would have to go over there, I have just a ton of like bash scripts and stuff that I've written over time. And I could just run them on WSL1. And to me, then this can sound so dumb, but the killer feature was because of the way they were doing it, that wine approach, you could actually access the Windows file system just like LSC documents, whatever, right? When you went to WSL2, you can still access it, but there's a whole bunch of ceremony. You've got to mount it. You've got to do all this. There's a bunch of rules, which I've heard this story. We actually had somebody a couple of years ago on from WSL, and I forgot his name, but he made an incredibly strong argument. Like, yes, that's one feature they lost, but they gained so much more by going with that more isolated model. So I totally understand why they did it, and I think my use case was particularly weird because I was basically a someone who was working on the back-end Rails application and the iOS application and got drafted into helping the Windows team out, right? So how often does that happen? But yeah, it's funny. I don't. We could go on and on about WSL too because I feel like there's kind of an explosion in their developer community over there. It's like they've seen the light about the command line. It's kind of amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Oh, it's great.
Well, I guess, while we're kind of exploring our past as well, like this might, I suspect like half your listeners, well, I'm not sure what age your listeners are, but like half of them might be like, oh, I remember that. And half of them are going to be like, what? But did you use Sigwin back in the day or however you pronounce it? Oh,
wow. Sigwin. I never actually had to say it out loud, but yeah, that was, let's pretend to be Bash on Windows.
Yeah, that was fun, right? I remember my dot file supported that for a while because everything was slightly different. Well, not everything, just enough stuff was just different enough that you had to, fiddle with a few different things. So
paths being broken, always fun.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. A fun blast from the past there.
Oh yeah. Oh Lord. So what is next for Homebrew?
Well, so that's the funny thing with Homebrew is like we've experimented in the past with having like public roadmaps and all this type of stuff. But because we're a volunteer run project, that never has worked super well for us, right? Because what ends up happening sometimes with the roadmap is people are really passionately pitch, we should do this next year, right? And then what you find in volunteer run projects is unless either they themselves are going to do the work or they can find multiple other people who are excited enough to sign up and be like, yeah, I'm going to do that. And then those people actually do that. Then it just doesn't really happen. So I guess from that perspective, I can speak mainly for myself and the stuff that we have already committed to. And unfortunately, generally in Homebrew, the stuff we pre-commit to is generally always bad news rather than good news, unfortunately. So like the big thing that we did, I can't remember how long ago it was, maybe a couple of years or something like that ago, is defining explicit like support tiers for Homebrew. So we have, I guess, what we previously would have called supported and unsupported. We now have like tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and then unsupported, right? And unsupported used to mean almost like anything where you're sort of off the beaten path, whereas unsupported now means like it does not work. We do not have any support in our code. Like we will not accept even any patches to make anything here work, right? So that's like right now, that's really old stuff like macOS Mojave 10.14 and earlier, right? We're talking about stuff that's over 10 years old at this point.
Yeah.
Or like, running on Homebrew on FreeBSD or, facetiously our unsupported things as, running on your toaster or CPUs instead of Minecraft and all that type of stuff. And then tier 3 is like Homebrew might work. It's not going to be very good. It's going to be a pretty unstable experience. And that's basically like, you're not going to have any binary packages or very few binary packages. You're building everything from source. Like it's just generally going to be very error prone. And there's a reason we used to essentially call that unsupported. And then tier 2 is like, it probably will work, but there's going to be some rough edges. And essentially the only thing that differentiates tier 1 and tier 2 really is like what our CI and testing environments are running. So if you're in an environment that we are not actively testing against, then it's like, okay, that's tier 2. Like everything might be completely fine for you 100% of the time, but if it's not, then it's like, we might hit something, we might miss things, whatever. But even then, right, so I'm about to update to the macOS public beta today. Technically, that will put me in a tier 2 configuration. It just happens to be that right now I don't really care. And then tier 1 is like, you're following all our standards and you're doing all the best things. But yeah, so the reason why, that was a particularly boring tangent there, I apologize. But the big change that is happening is in September this year, essentially Intel macOS is entirely moving to tier 3. So so if you're still on an Intel Mac, then as of September-ish, Homebrew is going to become a lot less pleasant for you to use. A lot of people are already preemptively upset about it. I imagine even more people are going to be even more upset about it. But I mean, essentially, it's because the right, there's a long tail of people using Intel Macs that are like, they still work fine for people, right? And I get it that like people are reliant on Homebrew, and hearing that that's going to be broken is not great. But I mean, so in our case, like Apple has announced that I think it's macOS 28 is not going to support Intel
at all.
So I think I can't even remember if it's 28 or 27. But basically, like Apple's put the writing on the wall that it's like, Intel support is slowly going away. And also GitHub, who supplies a bunch of our CI infrastructure, have also said the writing's on the wall and their Intel runners are going away. So essentially, we're just in a world where it's like, okay, you've got, I guess, GitHub being part of Microsoft, you've got two multi-billion, maybe trillion-dollar organizations that are saying we can't really support this anymore. So we as a group of volunteers can't support this anymore, right?
Well,
like we can't.
Yeah, there's got to be the practical question too, is if your infrastructure is strongly running on those GitHub action runners, you're not going to stand up a whole new infrastructure just to support Intel Macs into the future. It seems. Yeah. And we
do already have some of our own internal infrastructure for Intel Macs, but again, like just even in a virtualized environment, the Intel runners are so much slower that we've already don't support as many OSs, and we don't do as rigorous testing on Intel because it's just too slow. And if we were doing that, then it would slow down everything for everyone else. So that's one of the big kind of negative changes. I guess the positive changes with Homebrew is we're continuing to kind of just work really hard on improving performance. We dabbled with, I think this was announced in Homebrew 6 actually, is that we had a kind of an early alpha of like a Rust front end for Homebrew, because that was the cool thing. Everyone there's lots of vibe coding of them. But in the end, I put a fairly decent, probably 3 months of work into it. And in the end, we found that like for most things, even without much performance optimization, the Ruby side was outperforming the Rust side, right? So given that, it got to a point where it's like, well, there's a bunch of synthetic benchmarks that a lot of these vibe-coded Rust frontends we use, where they'll say like, oh, if you repeatedly reinstall OpenSSL in a loop 600 times, then we're 100 times faster than Homebrew. And it's like, well, that's not exactly. That's not what people are actually doing. Like the interesting case is the cold reinstall without a warm cache of a piece of software that is widely used, right? And that's the case that in the end ended up being either equally fast in Ruby or in some cases slightly faster. I think just due to the fact that code has just been around for a long time and it's had a lot more performance optimization work on it, right? And I'm sure, Michael, you've been around the block a few times, right? Like there's also this kind of slightly, it was there when I was at university, and I'm sure it's still there now, like almost 20 years later, where this idea that I think a lot of, particularly maybe more novice programmers have this idea of, if you port something from a higher level language to a low level language, it will always be faster, right? So C code will always run faster than Python code or Java code or whatever. And it's like, depending on what you're doing, it's like, yeah, it might be, but in a bunch of cases, it won't be. And in a case like Homebrew's, where the vast majority of what you're waiting for Homebrew to do is download stuff off the internet.
So it's got to be networking and
Exactly. So it's your disk speed and it's your network speed.
Right, networking and I/O. Do you have that good old SSD or not?
Yeah, and with us doing a lot more parallelization and threading and more clever stuff like that, which to be fair, like Ruby used to be very bad at, and Apple, well, I guess earlier Intel CPUs that were less fewer cores than we're seeing nowadays used to be not as great at. But basically, like that's once you throw a bunch of threads at these problems as well, like the gap between Rust and Ruby is a lot slimmer for a case like Homebrew, unless you're just doing a lot of like very simple data stuff, which is again is not what most users are doing most of the time, right?
Yeah, I get a little bit of crap for this sometimes, but really, if you're optimizing for speed on your language choice, then either you've done everything else perfectly, which I don't believe, or this isn't you personally, this is you as in one, right. Or you've read some white papers and some subreddits and you got really hyped up. Like we have a very small but very aggressively passionate Rust contingent in the community here, and they're great. But like sometimes you'll see the Rust code that let's say you just put up on GitHub, and in my mind, the primary advantage of Rust is that memory safety, right? But if you're throwing that unsafe keyword around everywhere, you just gave that up. So wouldn't you rather? And now I know in the age of vibe coding, my whole developer productivity argument may or may not hold up anymore. But to me, if I could get something done quickly in Ruby, for example, usually this could change. We see all these crazy layoffs. Usually developer time is actually your biggest cost. So yeah, I get pinched by the grad people all the time. The Rust folks are always being like, "Oh, you released this thing. I just released an IoT thing in open source in Ruby called Dredger." And the answer was pretty simple because I could get it done really fast in Ruby and I needed it. Right. Instead of, and also it's just, there's a whole argument here about what is and isn't performance versus like giving up for safety. And it's a tough one, man. I applaud you for embracing the Rust folks because that's hard.
Yeah. I mean, in my mind, like this is the thing, right? Is like we were seeing a lot of other Rust front ends, and it looked like a lot of them were getting traction, and they, there were certain operations that we were seeing a lot of, legitimate speed differences on. But I guess what I found interesting about it was, and you notice I'm deliberately not naming any names because I don't want to shame any projects in particular. But I think the thing is as well is that like, and this is the classic thing that you get with a lot of software projects as well, where a lot of them were just implementing, 90% of Homebrew's functionality. And in some cases, like you would install, depending on the particular project and how far along they were, anywhere between like 1% and 10% of Homebrew's packages, you would install them and they just would be broken and wouldn't work correctly. So it's like, okay, so like if you just do fewer things, then yes, it can be faster by not doing it correctly, right? And in some ways, that's also a lesson for Homebrew because there were a couple things like that where we benchmarked it and it was like, okay, like, so for example, again, a very boring side quest for you, but might be interesting for people kind of digging in on how we do development. So yeah, so one of the things I noticed that none of these tools were doing was generating S-bombs for customers. And and those were default in Homebrew. And I did a bunch of profiling. And I'm like, okay, it's actually quite expensive to generate these, right? We are spending, like probably like a second on every install or whatever, because it's these massively deep nested layers of JSON with their entire dependency tree and whatever. And I'm like, I don't think people care very much about this. So we switched it from being opt out to being opt in for performance reasons, basically, right? But then again, this is maybe another nice segue for you. Like we, came along, give it a few months, and a lot of the AI tooling, a lot of us on Homebrew have been using, has got really, really good at doing this stuff performantly, right? So I was able to go back to the drawing board and say, okay, this was really slow. Let's almost like riff off the design here, and we're able to come back with a design and re-enable them that makes them dramatically faster by pushing more of the slow part into RCI and out of like users kind of install paths, right? And we could do that just really,
I should say, because I think there probably is a bunch of people who won't know. SBOM is just a software bill of materials. So basically, what are the dependencies? If you don't work in enterprise stuff or government stuff, you may or may not have had to deal with it, but it's pretty standard. You need to document, all your dependencies and their dependencies and what that looks like, and la. Yeah, see, the more you guys know. Also, you can just get ChatGPT to do that now. Codex can do that in like 15 seconds, though. So.
Yep.
Yeah. Just point it at the repo and be like, go. It's so funny how I feel like we're in this strange transition period of tooling, right? A lot of these tools didn't exist, yet venerable tools like Homebrew, I don't think are going anywhere.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is the funny thing, because I mean, there's been a lot of people who've said, "Oh, well, you can just AI vibe code most of these projects in
we'll see in 6
minutes.
months. Let's take a bet. Yeah.
Well, but this is the thing. But and a bunch of people have done this for Homebrew. And well, I guess there's a few arguments here, right? So one is like, yeah, a bunch of people have done this for Homebrew, but it's you're not actually, in some ways, like writing the code is not the hard bit.
Hard part.
Right? It's maintaining that for lots of people over a long period of time, providing support for those people, like the classic legacy system thing of like, okay, there might be bugs or things that are not ideal, but we know what they are, right? Whereas when you create something new, you have a bunch of bugs too, you just don't know what they are yet, right? But then there's also the like, okay, well, so what is Homebrew? Is Homebrew the command you use to brew install, or is Homebrew all of the packages that get updated like on a daily basis? Hundreds and sometimes thousands of packages that kind of churn from day to day, getting upgrades and updates and testing and whatever. And it's like, that's the bit where it's like, okay, you could fork Homebrew or vibe code Homebrew or whatever, but like no one is trying to go and replicate that, because it's actually very difficult, right? To have that combination of like deterministic automation and CI infrastructure and people who are wanting to do that work and willing to do that work and are all communicating and interacting and whatever, right? And that's the bit where I'm like, look, like that's the hard bit of the open source project there, right? Like you could throw away all Homebrew's code tomorrow and spin up some new stuff, but it's that, this kind of like massive stuff that people like Homebrew or Debian or Red Hat or whoever have done, right? Like there's a reason why even like very relatively small Linux distros like rise up and die pretty quickly, because it's an enormous amount of work to do that for thousands of packages, right? And you either need to lean very, very heavily on the community and or automation and or like a small group of very dedicated people, of which Homebrew has all of these things, right? And building them from scratch is really hard.
Well, and you have to wonder too, if you're going to try to like, I don't know, make up your hotel brew to compete with Homebrew or be an alternative to, is that let's say you do have that dedicated team, is that even the best use of your folks' time?
Yeah.
Given
exactly.
Given that Homebrew exists, to me, I've always gone on the conservative side with this stuff. Like, I ship all my customers Ubuntu LTS, RHEL, or OpenSUSE, depending on where they are, because some places have weird requirements for SUSE, but always LTS, always in a pretty boring Docker container, unless they don't want containerization. Stable Ruby, stable Python, right? I just never understood the allure of going with the super new, could disappear tomorrow thing.
Yeah, I agree. Although I guess there's an irony there, because although Homebrew is not that thing, Homebrew is often the best way of installing all of those things, because we have just such a wide array of software, and we kind of, our software update pipeline is not fully automated. It always has a human in the loop before any software gets a new version into Homebrew. But we are often the fastest ecosystem at updating stuff. And what that means is, like, if you are interested in some of these kind of bleeding edge tools and you want to try them out, then they're only a brew install away. And then if you're like, this is trash, then brew uninstall, problem solved, right?
Yeah. Well, and brew is infrastructure for a lot of people. I mean, I know that's a loaded word because it has a different technical meaning, but I would never want to risk like installing all my dependencies for all my clients on something I don't trust, because that would be, I think that would be crazy. So anyway, okay. So we always wrap with the same question. What is one tool that you can't live without? Tool is defined super loosely. The only rule is it can't be something you yourself make. So we've had people mention e-bikes, electric kettles, a ton of coffee stuff. So anything.
Okay. I had a software one in mind, but I'm going to, given that you mentioned lots of non-software, I'm going to make it more fun. I'm going to say probably my AirPods, right? So I actually own, like, literally in the room with me right now are 4 different pairs of AirPods. Like,
nice.
And they're just great. Like, it's just the combination of, I used to be one of those audiophile people with, like, not the not the crazy audiophile people who believe in all the woo-woo with the crystals that make your music sound better, but the people who are like, I would buy nice headphones and nice speakers and all this type of stuff, right? But like, I think with AirPods, they are both like my AirPods Max, which I'm not wearing right now. I've got my AirPods Pro 2 in my ears right now. But AirPods Max on my table in front of me are just probably the best sounding headphones I've ever used ever. The noise canceling is the best of any headphones I've ever had ever. They're probably the most comfortable, at least like over the head headphones I've ever used ever. And they are ludicrously expensive. You know, when you tell people how much you've spent on those headphones, they look at you generally like you're insane. But they're just great and they sound great and I love music and they make music very appealing. And yeah, they're just, and I think the killer feature with them really is the whole, like, when you put them in your ears and take them out of the case, your devices will magically switch over and then they magically switch away when you take them out your ears. And all of this type of stuff that Apple is just very good at. Like, you know, some might say proprietary lock-in, others would say, you know, a lot of very hard engineering work that goes into making these experiences seamless. And yeah, and I'm just sucker for them. I love them.
Yeah, I have to agree. I am one of those crazy people who did buy the German headphones. And I have compared them to my first gen AirPods Max, and it's really not a significant difference. In fact, the annoyance of the Bluetooth not wanting to cooperate between different devices on the non-Apple ones versus, because I only listen to music either, I'm ashamed to say I have a vinyl record player, but I use that so little. It's always my phone, right?
Yep.
My phone's an iPhone. And for some reason, on the rare occasions I have to pair those German headphones to another machine, that whole managing two devices thing, it's just not going well. But the AirPods never mess it up. So I got to give it to you there. And they're not that expensive. I've had my first gen ones since literally they came out. I pre-ordered them. So how many years ago is that?
Yeah. My kid still uses my first gen ones. Yeah. Still working, still happily chugging away. And ultimately for me, like, price is always like, how much do you use something, right? So like, I guess a little side mention. So there's a game like Total Warhammer, of which they've had like 20, 30 DLC over the years, of which, you know, cost anywhere between £5 and £20 or whatever. And like, I have bought all of the DLC, but then I've also played the game for over 1,100 hours at this point. Jeez. So I'm like, yeah, I've spent a bunch of money on it, but I've got my money's worth, right? Yeah. And same deal with my AirPods, right? The amount of hours they have spent in my ears is obscene, right? So they sort of pay for themselves in that way.
Same way about Civ 7, even though it's relatively new. I don't mind paying their, granted, slightly higher than I'd like DLC prices, because I'm already several hundred hours into it, and that game only came out, I think, this year, or maybe the end of last year. So yeah. So, well, Mike, it's been great having you. We're all going to brew install our way to glory. And I'll put all your links in the show notes.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Great to chat. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Take it easy.